It happened just minutes ago, and that's what made it impossible to control. The setting was familiar, the questions routine, the tone relaxed enough to feel safe. Then one answer drifted slightly off course, and Jamie Dornan realized, too late, that he had crossed into territory he had avoided for years. At first, it sounded like clarification, not confession. Jamie spoke calmly, almost thoughtfully, as if he were explaining context rather than revealing anything new. But when he mentioned Dakota Johnson, the room shifted. The pause that followed wasn't technical or awkward. It was heavy, the kind that signals words can't be taken back. Those watching live sensed it immediately. This wasn't a rehearsed statement or a calculated soundbite. It was the tone, measured but unguarded, that made it clear something had slipped through. Jamie didn't look relieved, he looked aware. The host tried to move on, but the moment had already anchored itself. Jamie continued, not elaborating, but acknowledging something he had previously deflected every time it surfaced. He didn't dramatize it, and that restraint made the admission land harder. Silence filled the space where explanation might have been expected. Within seconds, clips began circulating online. Viewers replayed the segment, trying to identify the exact point where a line had been crossed. Some thought they'd imagined it. Others caught the subtle shift in Jamie's posture, the way his voice steadied as if bracing for impact. What startled fans wasn't the content of what he said, it was the fact that he said anything at all. For years, Jamie had navigated questions about Dakota with practiced neutrality. He acknowledged collaboration, mutual respect, professional admiration. This time, he acknowledged something else. Not a feeling, not an event, but significance. That distinction mattered. He didn't confess to love or regret. He confessed to awareness, to knowing that his connection with Dakota had shaped decisions he never explained publicly. It was the first time he admitted that avoiding the topic wasn't accidental, it was intentional. The immediacy of the moment added pressure. There was no chance to reframe the narrative or soften the language. Whatever Jamie meant, it existed now in raw form, exposed to interpretation. And interpretation moves fast when fans believe they're witnessing a truth unfolding in real time. Commentators rushed to label it a bombshell, but insiders urged restraint. This wasn't a revelation designed to shock. It was a crack in a carefully maintained surface. The reason it felt so jarring was because of how controlled Jamie had been until now. As the clip spread, attention turned to what Jamie didn't say. He didn't name a specific moment. He didn't assign emotion. He didn't reference timing. That absence suggested the confession wasn't about revisiting the past. It was about acknowledging its weight. Fans began asking why this happened now. The answer seemed tied to the setting itself. Live moments don't allow revision. There's no pause button, no second take. In that environment, the guardrails that usually protect public figures can fail quietly, without warning. Those close to Jamie later described the admission as inevitable rather than impulsive. According to them, he had reached a point where continuing to sidestep the truth felt more dishonest than risky. The confession wasn't planned, but it wasn't accidental either. It was overdue. The reaction online intensified as speculation filled the gaps Jamie left open. Some projected romance. Others assumed conflict. But a smaller group noticed something else. Jamie never looked panicked. He looked resolved, as if he had accepted the consequences the moment the words left his mouth. That's what made the moment linger. Confessions fueled by emotion often collapse under scrutiny. This one didn't. It stayed vague, controlled, and unmistakably deliberate, even as it escaped its intended boundaries. By the time the segment ended, there was no official clarification. No follow-up statement, just the echo of a sentence that had altered the narrative without defining it. Fans weren't shocked because a secret existed. They were shocked because Jamie finally admitted he had been guarding one. And once a confession exists in the open, even without details, it changes the questions that follow. The story was no longer about whether something mattered. It was about what that admission made impossible to deny. Because some truths don't explode when they come out. They settle, quietly, permanently, into everything that comes next, the confession didn't land like a declaration. It landed like a correction, quiet, precise, and impossible to ignore. What Jamie Dornan finally admitted wasn't a feeling he'd been hiding, but a responsibility he'd been carrying. He acknowledged that his choices, silences, and careful detours had been shaped by one connection more than he ever allowed himself to say out loud. That distinction reframed everything. Fans who expected romance heard something else entirely: awareness. Jamie wasn't confessing love, he was owning influence. He admitted that decisions he framed as professional were, at times, informed by a deeper need to keep a boundary intact, one that involved Dakota Johnson. Why did that shock people more than a scandal would have? Because it challenged the assumption that neutrality equals absence. Jamie's words suggested the opposite, that neutrality had been active, intentional, and sustained. Silence wasn't a lack of truth, it was a method of protecting it. Those close to him say the timing mattered. Years earlier, saying this would have invited misinterpretation and forced everyone into positions they didn't choose. Now, with distance and context, the admission could exist without demanding spectacle. The risk wasn't gone, but it was manageable. What Jamie owned in that moment was not a secret event, but a long-standing boundary that required maintenance. He acknowledged that keeping it intact had cost him clarity at times, and perhaps honesty in interviews. The confession wasn't about rewriting the past, it was about naming the framework that shaped it. That's why the reaction split so sharply. Some fans felt disoriented, as if the ground beneath a familiar story had shifted. Others felt validated, recognizing patterns they'd sensed but couldn't articulate. Both reactions stemmed from the same realization: the story had always been more deliberate than it appeared. Dakota's response, indirect and restrained, added weight to the admission. She didn't rush to confirm or deny. She didn't amplify the moment or shut it down. Her silence read as alignment rather than avoidance, suggesting the confession didn't violate an understanding, it completed one. Insiders describe the dynamic as something both had learned to manage with care. Not because it was dangerous, but because it was influential. Once acknowledged publicly, even in part, it altered the narrative gravity around them. That's the consequence Jamie accepted when he spoke. The "minutes ago" aspect mattered because it stripped away preparation. There was no time to polish language or anticipate every interpretation. The truth came out in its most stable form, measured, incomplete, but unmistakable. That stability is what made it believable. In the hours that followed, speculation tried to fill the gaps. But the confession resisted simplification. It didn't provide a beginning or an ending. It explained a posture, a way of standing inside a complicated reality without leaning into it publicly. Those who know Jamie say the relief came later. Not from applause or approval, but from alignment. For the first time, his public words matched a private structure he'd been maintaining for years. The risk he took wasn't emotional exposure, it was narrative correction. What fans ultimately grappled with wasn't the idea that something existed between Jamie and Dakota. It was the idea that maturity sometimes looks like restraint, not denial. That growth can require silence, and honesty can arrive without detail. The confession changed the questions that followed. No longer, did something happen? But, how much did it shape what we saw? That shift is why the moment endured. It didn't feed curiosity, it redirected it. And that's the twist few anticipated. Jamie didn't confess to what people wanted to hear. He confessed to what mattered: accountability for the space he kept, and why he kept it. In doing so, he didn't ignite a scandal. He clarified a structure that had been hiding in plain sight. Some confessions aren't about revealing a secret. They're about finally explaining the silence.